Hey guys, so in this coaching video, I want to go over two main things. One, portion sizes, and while that is certainly highly individualized, I want to give you a good starting point of how much protein you should put on your plate, how much carbohydrates you should put on your plate, and how much fat should be on your plate. So we're going to keep it real simple. So a good starting point is if you look at the palm of your hand. This area here is about how much protein you want to start with. Okay? And then you'll just fill the rest of your plate up with your vegetables and some fruit. As far as fats, remember, fat is already included in your protein source. We can certainly add fats. And if we're going to add fats, typically we're cooking with them, about as much as the size of your thumb. So if we're putting coconut oil or a ghee, or if we're adding some avocado in there, that's about how much you want to use. Now that's just a starting point. Some of you will need to eat more protein than this, some of you less. And that's where we will work with you on an individual basis to determine how much that should be and teach you how to dial back in to your body and really listen to the symptoms and response from your food. As you eliminate processed foods and allow the appestat to do its job, which is to regulate satiety, your body will naturally gravitate towards that homeostasis in your food cravings, and we'll teach you how to understand those, and then you can adjust those protein, carbohydrate, and fat intakes as necessary for your unique individual biochemistry. This is another reason why we should chew our food till it's liquefied, and it gives the time for the appestat to regulate all of those nutritional components that are found in all of our foods and allow us to get the right amount of nutrition on board without undereating or overeating. So that's a good place to start. The next thing that I'm going to go over here is how your body regulates blood sugar and what happens whenever we have excess carbohydrates in our diet and we get an excess of circulating blood sugar, and how the body responds to that in regards to insulin and how it affects our health. So this is actually a very complicated biochemistry going on here. So what I'm going to attempt to do is to give you the nutshell version of it so that you understand just how important and relevant blood sugar control really is. Especially if your main goal is optimal body composition and losing fat in inches, which the vast majority of our culture has a goal of that. And you must not only understand this process, but you have to absolutely respect it because this is physiology, and it's also what most people have a problem with and why you can't reach your goals. So first, I wanted to teach you about insulin and the whole physiological process that happens when we eat food, specifically carbohydrates. So insulin is about as close to a master hormone as you can get. It's secreted by the beta cells of the pancreas, and I'm going to tie that in later and why that's important. So insulin facilitates the moving of macronutrients being fats, proteins, and carbohydrates, from the bloodstream into cells for immediate or future use. So insulin essentially is the transporter of the nutrition in our food. The whole reason we eat food is because it has nutrition in it. And the body needs this nutrition in the form of fats, proteins, carbohydrates, and vitamins and minerals and secondary compounds so that the millions and millions of cells that are in your body can then do their job. Their job being everything from creating new cells to when you cut yourself and your body needs to create scar tissue to repair that cellular damage done on the organ or cells or muscles, etc. That's how it does it. It takes the nutrition from your food, which is fuel for the cell, and the cell then can do its job. Some cells repair tissue, other cells grow hair, and everything in your body is enzyme and cellular driven. So this insulin, it's what moves or transports this nutrition throughout the body and into cells. It is highly tied to carbohydrates, not just carbohydrates, but it's highly tied to carbohydrates, because when the body converts carbohydrates into glucose, which is the predominant energy source that the body uses from everything from working out to thinking to breathing. It is the preferred source of energy for the body. So what insulin does is it takes that, what insulin does in regards to glucose, this energy source, is it wants to store that in the liver or the muscles first. That's the first storage places that it's going to take this glucose to. Now, what's interesting about liver and muscle cells is they can only store so much glucose. They're like the gas tank in your car. If your car only holds 20 gallons of gas, you can only put 20 gallons of gasoline in it. It can't take 20 and a half, and it can't take 21 gallons. It can only take 20. So insulin responds to this glucose that's circulating in the bloodstream, and then it says, hey, I've got to go store this so that the body can utilize this for energy, so the muscles can work. And so I'm going to go see if there's any vacancy in the liver and the muscle cells. If there is room in the liver and the muscle cells, the liver and the muscle cells will gladly take the glucose and store it there. When the liver and the muscle cells are full, the liver and fat cells then convert that extra glucose into palmitic acid. Let me back up a second. In short, when the liver and the muscle cells are full, the glucose has got to go somewhere else. So basically it gets stored in the fat cells. Really, in a nutshell version, that's how we have all of these increased fat cells, is because the liver and the muscle cells are full and there's nowhere else for the glucose to go. And the only way that the liver and muscle cells can empty those tanks is through essentially a lot of activity. So either vigorous exercise, or if we were humans 100 or 200 years ago, an average day was pretty exhausting. I mean, it was physically exhausting. There was a lot of work to do just to get things like water and food. So we moved a lot more. Our bodies were a lot more physically active. There was no need for to go to the gym 200 or 300 years ago to get the muscle cells active enough to where they can take up more glucose, because just an average day was very vigorous. But we live here in the 21st century where we drive cars and we sit at desks and we just don't get a lot of physical activity. And so that's why things like the liver and the muscle cells, those tanks stay full all the time, and then insulin is constantly looking for another place to store this glucose, which in our case in the 21st century, unfortunately, is getting stored in fat cells. But a little bit more on that process. So when the liver and muscle cells are full, the liver and the fat cells then convert that extra glucose, because it doesn't just get stored in there as sugar. It converts it into palmitic acid. Palmitic acid is a type of saturated fat. This palmitic acid then binds together in groups of 3 with glycerol. Okay, so you have groups of 3 of this palmitic acid bonds with glycerol, and that creates triglycerides. And so the reason why I wanted to explain that to you is because everyone's heard of triglycerides. It's one of the markers that physicians look for whenever they're doing blood work and looking at saturated fat content in your body, but they're also looking at the level of triglycerides, and that's often in our culture is something that's very elevated. So I found that relative to explain to you why that is such a problem in our culture is because we have a problem with excess glucose because we're eating way too many carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are not bad, by the way. There's nothing wrong with carbohydrates. It's just that we way overdo them, and our macronutrients that we're consuming, fats, proteins, and carbohydrates, are way out of balance. So it's not that carbs are bad. We're just consuming way too many of them relative to the amount of proteins and fats that we're consuming. Now, insulin also coordinates the metabolic shift from predominantly either burning carbohydrates or fat. So if there's an excess amount of blood sugar in the bloodstream, the body's going to burn that first. Okay, so excess blood sugar in the bloodstream equals excess insulin in the bloodstream as well. We're going to get back to that in a second. So when we have excess amounts of glucose and insulin circulating in the bloodstream, when we do some physical activity, be it working out or working in the yard or anything that requires excessive exertion, the body's going to burn that excess blood sugar, that glucose in the bloodstream first. It's only if there's not an amount of excess glucose in the bloodstream that the cells then release stored energy and use body fat only when there's not a lot of circulating insulin. So if we don't have excess amounts of insulin and glucose circulating in the bloodstream, it's then that another hormone called glucagon will tell the cells, hey, we need more energy. We've already expended the energy in the muscle cells, and the liver's already taken that glucose, converted it back into glycogen so that the body, or it's stored as glycogen, and then glucagon goes in the liver and tells it, hey, we need more glucose here, so it converts it back into glucose and uses it. So once you've tapped in all of this and the body still needs energy, then the cells are allowed to release the stored energy and fat. But it cannot do that if there's a lot of circulating glucose and insulin in the bloodstream. So unfortunately, the situation that a lot of people are in now is that we have not only elevated levels of insulin and glucose in the bloodstream, but because there's no room to store the energy in the liver and the muscles, that we have this issue of too much palmitic acid being made and binding with the glycerol and creating excess amounts of triglycerides, and then we're storing all of that energy into fat cells, and then of course we gain weight. It makes it very, very difficult to maintain an ideal weight. And then what makes it really difficult is then even when we start exercising and becoming more physically active, if we're still not balanced nutritionally and we're still over-consuming carbohydrates, the net effect is, as much as we want to tap into these fat cells to get that extra energy, there's still too much glucose and insulin circulating in the blood. So we're never really tapping into the fat cells to burn that as energy, which really sucks because you're putting in all this hard work in the gym, and we're working out and we're doing HIIT and we're doing cardio and we're doing all the right things from increasing our activity wise. But if we didn't change the nutritional aspect of it, we're literally spinning our wheels because we're just burning off all of the excess glucose that's circulating in the bloodstream instead of tapping into where we really want to tap into. Now, a couple more things that are important here. This excess storage into the cells is a real problem over time, because when the cells get overfilled with this excess glucose, it creates all of this oxidative stress, and which in turn creates these elevated fat levels. The problem with that is when we have all this oxidative stress and elevated fat levels, that's how we create free radicals. Okay? And overall, that just creates this systemic inflammation. We have all of our global inflammatory markers are up, and we just have nothing but all of this oxidative stress and free radical. This oxidative stress creates this. It creates a what's called a reactive oxidative species, which is free radicals, and this creates all this inflammation. So all of this inflammation in this chronic hyperglycemia, okay, this too much glucose in the bloodstream just all the time, eventually damages the beta cells. Now remember in the beginning when I told you insulin is secreted by the beta cells of the pancreas. So all of this oxidative stress and the free radicals damages the beta cells, which is what releases insulin in the first place. Now the problem with this is as it damages, and what I mean by damages is eventually this excess glucose actually disintegrates the beta cells in the pancreas to the point where they can no longer produce insulin. What does that equal? Type 2 diabetes, which is an absolute epidemic in our culture nowadays. And a lot of people don't know how it happens. This is the purpose of why I'm explaining this to you. This is how it happens. This physiological process here, or the lack of efficiency of it with most people, is what's creating all this damage and ultimately creating things like type 2 diabetes. It's because when the pancreas cannot release insulin, then we no longer can adequately control blood sugar. And not only that, but we can no longer adequately transport all of these nutrients either, which is why obesity leads to type 2 diabetes. And then when you get there, that's why it's damn hard to reverse. It can't be reversed. I mean, the body can do miraculous things, but it just makes it increasingly difficult. So I know I jump around a lot. I'm trying to describe it in a way that everyone can understand, and hopefully, you see the relevance and just how important it really is to control. So this is why we don't want to have excessive carbohydrate intake. Remember, carbohydrates is not evil. There's nothing wrong with carbohydrates. We need them. We're just getting them in way too excessive amounts. I want to give you a couple tips, because in this program, of course, we're exercising a lot. One, before your workout, you want to ensure that you do not eat excessive carbohydrates, because that's when we really want to start tapping in and burning the excess energy that's been stored in the fat cells. So I don't want a lot of glucose circulating in the bloodstream. So no fruit pre-workout. You can have some carbohydrates, but they need to be lower in the glycemic index. In your pre-workout, if you're working out in the morning, you want to get a little something in your body, a good 30 to 60 minutes before you work out, but it needs to be predominantly protein. Okay. Post-workout, we also do not want to consume a lot of carbohydrates. Why? For the same reason. I want the body tapping into the excess energy that's been stored in the fat cells, not burning all of the carbohydrates that you just ate post-workout, because whenever we're working out and we're following the overload principle and we're lifting weights, the whole point of that is to create a little damage into the muscle cells. so that the nervous system then has to go in there and repair that tissue, which is good because repairing that tissue is going to take 48 to 72 hours, and it takes a lot of calories and a lot of work, a lot of energy for the body to repair that tissue. And I want it getting that energy from the stored, too much stored, the energy that's in the fat cells. I don't want it to burn off all the carbohydrates that you're going to eat post-workout. It doesn't mean that you can't eat carbohydrates. You just can't eat them within about an hour of your workout. So post-workout, again, predominantly protein, and then you can have a small amount of vegetables with that. For example, I don't want you to drink a fruit smoothie post-workout. There's nothing wrong with a fruit smoothie as long as you're getting, fat and protein in with that. Just don't do it immediate post-workout. That can be like an hour or so later after you've eaten some protein post-workout. I hope I cleared things up for you, and if you have any questions, my team and I are always here. That's what we're here for. We're here for you, and I'll see you soon.